Welcome back. We're finishing up with whale evolution this time. Let's jump right in. These last three evolutionary ancestors are important, so we're going to deal with each one of them. The first animal we're going to talk about is Rodhocetus. To be honest, I'd never heard of this one until watching the Dr. Dawkins video. That being the case, I started doing my research. The first thing that hit me was how many different images you're going to find of Rodhocetus and how different they look to each other. Remember, when all you have are the bones, even if you have every bone, the reconstruction is a guess. That's why each can look so different from the other. So let's look at the actual evidence that each of these drawings is based from. Do you notice anything? Let me overlay the actual evidence with the drawing. Now do you see anything interesting? How about they show the animal with a fluke like a whale, but the actual evidence doesn't show anything like that. As a matter of fact, the actual evidence doesn't support the tail, the hind legs, or the front legs. Listen to Dr. Gingrich, the man who discovered and reconstructed Rodhocetus, as he tells us about the tail.
Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rodhocetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rodhocetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on Rodhocetus based on the other pieces of anatomy?
Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rodhocetus. So we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Listen as they talk about the supposed flippers and the depiction of the legs.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rodhocetus.
Now since then, we've found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms in other words, of Rodhocetus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail and really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that Rodhocetus would have had a fluke tail.
So even Dr. Gingrich no longer believes that the drawings that you see in the museums and universities depicting this creature with a fluke and a flipper are accurate. Doesn't believe it. Why do we still see it? Interesting. Watch a clip from another video explaining how Ambulocetus came to be.
This is why Pakicetus disappears. It simply evolves into a new species. Poor swimming skills make Pakicetus vulnerable, so it adapts in 3 key ways to swim better. His tail develops muscles and flattens like that of an otter. His back legs shorten and widen to act like flippers. He becomes more streamlined. Fewison names this new species Ambulocetus natans, which means the walking and swimming whale.
Dr. Carl Werner, he researched the topic of evolution for 18 years. He then began a 17-year-long study to see what the actual evidence supports. After all of this research, he came to the following conclusion. The bottom line is that Rodhocetus is not the nail in the coffin proving evolution. There's way too much speculation for it to be that. Let's not forget Dorudon though. That's also on the charts, so we need to take a look at it. According to secular scientists, Dorudon was a fully aquatic whale that had very small hind limbs that may have projected slightly beyond the body wall. Let's address the supposed vestigial legs. Before we look at that though, we've got to define vestigial. In biology, a vestigial organ is Here's something you may find interesting. At one time, it was believed that there were 180 vestigial organs in humans. Some of the most popular organs that were claimed to be vestigial were the appendix, the tonsils, the pineal gland, and the thymus. The truth is that every one of those organs are now known to have an extremely important function. Take the tonsils, for example. It's now known that when you take them out, there are serious consequences. And it's not just the tonsils. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of the 180 vestigial organs are no longer classified as vestigial. This is a reminder for us to be careful. Just because we don't know what something does or what function it has, doesn't mean that it's not important or that it doesn't have a function. But what about those whale legs? Some modern day whales have bones that are embedded in their tissue that evolutionists claim to be vestigial legs. These bones, though, they strengthen the pelvic wall and they act as an organ anchor. What I find interesting is that there have been some changes when it comes to the interpretation of these two animals. The chart you're looking at is how whale evolution was depicted in the 1990s. Now take a look and see how it was depicted in the 2000s. Basilosaur and Dorudon, they've switched positions, and the wolf-like Masonichid has been replaced with a hippo. If there's no doubt about the fact of evolution that has happened, why so many different ancestors? By the way, as you study for yourself, you'll see that it is believed that the whale has evolved from either a wolf-like animal, a hippo-like animal, a deer-like animal, or, say what, a deer-like animal? Yes, that's one of the interpretations. Meet one of the newest suggested ancestors to the whale. Interestingly enough, it looks very similar to the modern-day African mouse deer, which will jump into the water to evade being eaten by predators. Here's the bottom line about basilosaurs from two secular sources. First, the chart. Please notice where the basilosaurs are placed. They are off to the side, not linked to whales at all. They're an evolutionary dead end. Second is a quote from Dr. Gingrich, who's an expert in whale evolution. Let me give you one more quote. If it didn't give rise to later whales and is an evolutionary dead end, it is not an evolutionary ancestor. Let's take a look at another whale evolution chart. Remember what we spoke about in the lesson on family trees? What can you know just from this chart? Notice the two types of lines, skinny and bold. What does that mean? Skinny lines are story, bold line is evidence. Let's get rid of the belief, the skinny lines, and watch what happens. I find it interesting again that when we are just addressing the evidence, that all it shows is that one thing stayed one thing and never changed from or into anything else. I also find it interesting that the Masonichids, they lived the same time as Pachycetus, Ambulocetus, and every other transitional fossil, including the whale. This very clearly disproves that this animal was the grandfather of all the whales. The same thing is true of Dorudon and Basilosaurus. One wasn't transitioning into the other. They were contemporaries living at the same time, and according to the evolutionary model, one feeding on the other. Please allow me to do one last thing. Let's turn the actual evidence 90 degrees. Now let me replace the evolutionary worldview with a biblical worldview. According to God, the only one who's always been there, who knows everything, who told us what He did, He created everything. He told us how, why, and when He did it. He said that He created whales on day 5, and if He created whales on day 5, what should we find? Whales. What do we see? Whales. What does the evidence support? It supports that God created the way that He said that He did. And the same way that we see that dogs are dogs and cats are cats, the chart shows us that whales have always been whales. This doesn't support something turning into something else. It supports speciation. Yes, you can see one thing turning into another, but that's speciation, and God created animals with the ability to adapt to the environment that they live in. That is not evolution of a worm turning into a fish to crawl out of the land to become an amphibian, to turn into a rat, to turn into a wolf, to go back into the whale. These are two totally different processes. Please consider all of the unique features that a whale has in order for it to live in the water. These are significant. This is not some tiny thing. Think about this. Consider how much time the evolutionary model allows for all of these changes to have occurred. According to the Darwinian model, a mutation results in a new gene. That gene will then replace the old gene in the population, and the old models will replace with newer models. Kind of like cars. You get the old car, then you get a newer car, and you get rid of the old car. According to Dr. Jonathan Sarfati, population genetics calculations suggest that in 5 million years, 1 million years longer than the alleged time between Ambulocetus and Rodhocetus, animals with generation lines of about 10 years, typical of whales, could substitute no more than about 1,700 mutations. This is not nearly enough to generate the new information that whales need for aquatic life, even assuming that all the hypothetical information adding mutations required for this could somehow arise. So even with all of the long ages, and even if the tiny changes could add up to big changes, which they don't, there's just not enough time for any type of an animal to go back into the ocean and to become a whale. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, stay bold.